Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd seen those storm gray eyes that used to undo me with a single glance. 5 years since I'd walked away from the most intoxicating relationship of my life, convincing myself it was the mature thing to do. I'd built a solid career at Morrison and Associates, climbed the corporate ladder, earned respect. I was safe, predictable. Then she walked into our Monday morning meeting like a hurricane in a power suit. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet our new senior vice president, Bridget Rivera." Mr. Morrison's voice seemed to fade into white noise as those familiar eyes found mine across the mahogany conference table. Her lips, God, those lips I'd dreamed about for years, curved into the slightest smile. Not friendly, predatory. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down, hoping no one noticed my hands shaking. But Bridget noticed. She always noticed everything about me. "Sienna," she said, her voice like velvet over steel. "How lovely to see you again." The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Around us, my colleagues murmured polite greetings, but I could barely breathe. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, my professional haven, where the messy emotions of my past couldn't touch me. And here she was, disrupting everything just by existing. "Bridget," I managed, forcing my voice to stay level. "Welcome to the team." Her smile widened, and I knew I was in trouble. Deep, soul-destroying trouble. The first month was torture, pure, exquisite torture. Bridget threw herself into work with the same passionate intensity she'd once reserved. For me, she was brilliant. I'd forgotten how brilliant. Her presentations were flawless, her strategies innovative. She commanded every room she entered, and I found myself watching her the way I used to, mesmerized by the elegant way her hands moved when she spoke, the throaty laugh that made my stomach flip. But I was careful, professional. We worked on different accounts, kept our interactions minimal and cordial. I told myself I could handle this. I told my concerned coworker Jessica that we were fine, that our past was ancient history. "Are you sure?" Jessica had asked, studying my face. "Because you look like you're about to combust every time she walks by." "We're professionals," I'd replied, straightening my shoulders. "It's fine, but it wasn't fine." Not when Bridget's fingers would accidentally brush mine during file exchanges, sending electricity shooting up my arm. Not when she'd lean over my shoulder during meetings, her perfume, that same intoxicating blend of jasmine and something darker, making my head spin. Not when she'd catch me staring and hold my gaze just a moment too long, her eyes promising things that made my knees weak. The breaking point came on a particularly stressful Thursday. I'd escaped to the women's restroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to regain my composure after watching Bridget demolish our competitor's proposal with surgical precision. I was gripping the marble counter, taking deep breaths, when the door opened behind me. I didn't need to look in the mirror to know it was her. I could feel her presence like heat against my back. "Liar," she said, her voice low and dangerous. My reflection met her eyes in the mirror. She was leaning against the sink beside me, arms crossed, looking at me like she could see straight through my professional facade to the one I was desperately trying to hide. "I don't know what you mean," I whispered, but my breath was already hitching, my body betraying me the way it always had around her. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "You know exactly what I mean, Sienna. You think I don't see the way you look at me? The way your pulse races when I'm near?" Her fingers traced the air just above my wrist, not quite touching. "Your body remembers me, even if your mind wants to pretend otherwise." The air between us crackled with 5 years of unresolved tension. I should have walked away, should have maintained my boundaries. Instead, I turned to face her, our bodies inches apart in the small space between sinks. "This can't happen," I said, but even I could hear how weak my protest sounded. Her smile was wicked. "Can it?" Before I could respond, voices echoed in the hallway outside. We sprang apart, and I fled back to my office, my heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my mind. "Your body remembers me." God help me, it did. Every traitorous cell remembered exactly how she used to make me feel alive, electric, like I could conquer the world or burn it down, whichever she preferred. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. 3 weeks later, I was working late on the Peterson account, the office empty except for the distant sound of the cleaning crew. I was deep in spreadsheets when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then died completely, plunging the floor into darkness. "Perfect," I muttered, fumbling for my phone's flashlight. The windows showed nothing but driving rain. The storm that had been brewing all day had finally hit with vengeance. "Power's out in the whole building," came a familiar voice from across. The office, elevators too. My heart stopped. Of course Bridget was here. Of course she'd be the only other person crazy enough to work this late. "The security system's on backup power," she continued, her phone's light bobbing as she approached my cubicle. "We're locked in until morning, trapped in a dark office, with the one person who could unravel my self-control with a single look." "There's a conference room with emergency lighting," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should wait there." The backup lights in conference room C cast everything in an eerie yellow glow. We sat across from each other at the long table, the rain hammering against the windows, 2 phones providing additional light between us. It should have felt safe, professional. Instead, it felt intimate, like the storm had created a world where only we existed. "Remember that night in Chicago?" Bridget asked suddenly, her voice soft. "When we got caught in that thunderstorm?" I did remember. We'd been attending a conference, sharing a hotel room to save money. Young, broke, and stupidly in love. The storm had knocked out power to half the city, and we'd spent the night making love by candlelight, her skin golden in the flickering flame, her breathless moans mixing with the thunder outside. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't what?" "Remember how good we were together? How perfectly we fit?" She leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "You felt it too that night. The connection. Like we were 2 halves of the same soul." My throat tightened. That was a long time ago. Not that long. Her voice dropped, became hypnotic. "I still dream about you, Sienna. About the way you used to say my name when I touched you. About that little sound you make right before stop." The word came out rougher than I intended. I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. "We're not those people anymore, aren't we?" She stood, came around. The table, each step deliberate. "Then why are your hands shaking? Why can't you look at me without wanting to run?" She was behind my chair now, her presence overwhelming. I could feel the heat of her body, smell her perfume mixing with something uniquely her. When her hand settled on my shoulder, I jumped like I'd been burned. "Because you scare me," I admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. "You've always scared me." "Good," she whispered against my ear. "You should be scared. Because I'm not leaving this time, Sienna. I'm not letting you walk away again." Her hand slid from my shoulder to my neck, fingers tracing the pulse point that was beating wildly against her touch. I closed my eyes, every rational thought abandoning. "And me, Bridget, ... "I know," she said, her thumb stroking the sensitive skin below my ear. "I know you're scared of feeling too much, of wanting something more than your carefully controlled life. But I also know you haven't forgotten. How could you? What we had. It was everything. I should have moved away." should have reminded her about professionalism, about the complications, about all the reasons we'd broken up in the first place. Instead, I turned in my chair, looking up at her in the dim yellow light. She was beautiful. God, she was so beautiful it hurt to look at her. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual professional chignon. Her lips were parted slightly, her breathing as unsteady as mine, and her eyes, those storm gray eyes that had haunted my dreams, were dark with want. 5 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 years I've regretted letting you go. 5 years of trying to forget the way you tasted, the way you felt in my arms. 5 years of emptiness. Before I could stop myself, my hand reached up to cup her face. Her skin was soft, warm, exactly as I remembered. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed. I never stopped wanting you, I confessed, the truth spilling out like water through a broken dam. Even when I hated you for breaking my heart, even when I tried to convince myself I was over you, I never stopped. Her eyes opened, blazing with something fierce and hungry. Then stop running from us. The space between us evaporated. Our lips met with 5 years of pent-up desire, desperate and demanding. I stood, my chair scraping back, and suddenly her hands were in my hair and mine were gripping her waist, pulling her against me. The kiss was everything I remembered and more fire and sweetness, passion and tenderness, the taste of her that I'd never quite managed to forget. She backed me against the conference table, her thighs sliding between my legs, and I couldn't suppress the moan that escaped me. God, I've missed that sound. She breathed against my lips, her hands working at the buttons of my blouse. I should have stopped her. Should have remembered where we were, what the consequences could be. Instead, I helped her, my fingers fumbling with the zipper of her skirt while she pushed my blouse off my shoulders. The cool air of the conference room hit my heated skin, making me shiver. Or maybe that was the way Bridget was looking at me, like I was something precious and rare and completely hers. Beautiful, she murmured, her hand skimming over the lace of my bra. So beautiful. I used to imagine this having you again. But you're even more perfect than I remembered. Her mouth found my neck, teeth grazing the sensitive spot that made my knees buckle. I gripped the edge of the table for support, my head falling back as she worked her way down to my collarbone, each kiss branding me, claiming me. When her hands unhooked my bra, letting it fall to the floor, I was already lost. Lost in the feeling of her mouth on my skin, her hands relearning every curve, every sensitive spot that drove me wild. The conference table became our altar, papers scattered to the floor as she lifted me onto it, settling between my thighs. I love you, she said against my breast, the words vibrating through me. I never stopped loving you. I couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but gasp as her mouth and hands worshipped me with a desperation that matched my own. When she pushed my skirt up, her fingers finding the heat between my legs, I cried out, the sound echoing in the empty office. She whispered, but her smile was wicked. We don't want the security guards to hear, do we? I bit my lip, trying to stay quiet as she touched me with the skill that only comes from intimate knowledge, from knowing exactly what I needed. She played my body like a well-tuned instrument, bringing me right to the edge before pulling back, making me whimper with need. Please, I gasped, my nails digging into her shoulders. Bridget, please. Say you're mine, she demanded, her fingers still moving in that maddening rhythm that was driving me insane. Say you'll stop running. I'm yours, I sobbed, beyond caring about anything but the release she was holding just out of reach. I'm yours, I've always been yours. Please, ... She gave me what I needed then, her mouth finding mine to swallow. My cries as I shattered in her arms, 5 years of longing and denial exploding through me like a supernova. I was still trembling when a light suddenly blazed back to life, fluorescent harsh after the intimate yellow glow. We froze, still tangled together, as voices echoed in the hallway. The cleaning crew had arrived. Shit, Bridget breathed. And we scrambled to dress, her fingers shaking as badly as mine as we tried to make ourselves presentable. By the time the janitor entered the conference room, we were seated at opposite ends of the table, laptops open, looking for all the world. Like we'd been working the entire time. But I could see the flush on Bridget's cheeks, the way her lips were swollen from our kisses, the satisfied gleam in her eyes that I was sure was reflected in my own. The janitor, an older man named Frank, looked between us with knowing eyes. "Storm's passed," he said simply. "Elevators are working again." We gathered our things in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. In the elevator, Bridget stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, but we didn't speak. What was there to say? We'd crossed. A line shattered every professional boundary, and there was no going back. As the elevator doors opened on the parking garage, she finally turned to me. "This changes everything," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos we'd just unleashed. I nodded, not trusting my voice, because she was right. Everything had changed. The careful distance I'd maintained, the professional facade I'd built, it was all rubble now, destroyed by one perfect, terrible night. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said, and there was a promise in those words that made my pulse race all over again. I watched her walk to her car, her confident stride unchanged despite what we'd just done. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow we'd have to face the consequences of tonight. Tomorrow we'd have to figure out what this meant, where we could possibly go from here. But as I drove home through the empty streets, my body still humming with the memory of her touch, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. For the first time in 5 years, I felt alive again. The next morning brought harsh reality crashing down like a cold shower. I arrived at the office early, hoping to get my bearings before facing Bridget, but gossip traveled fast in our building. By 9 a.m., 3 different people had casually mentioned seeing lights on in the conference room during the blackout. By 10 a.m., Jessica was cornering me by the coffee machine with barely concealed concern. "Sienna, honey, are you okay? You look, I don't know, different." Different. If only she knew how different I felt, like my skin was too tight, like every nerve ending was still singing from Bridget's touch. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning as I replayed every moment, every sensation. "I'm fine," I lied, doctoring. My coffee with more sugar than I usually took. My hands were steady now, but I could still feel the phantom weight of Bridget's fingers intertwined with mine. "It's just ... Jessica glanced around, then lowered her voice. "People are talking about you and the new VP. Frank mentioned you two were working pretty late last night." My blood ran cold. "What kind of talking?" Before she could answer, Bridget's voice cut through the morning chatter like a blade through silk. "Good morning, everyone. Sienna, could I see you in my office? We need to discuss the Peterson account." Every head in the break area turned to watch as I followed her down the hall, my cheeks burning. Her office was a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern and sleek like everything else about her. She closed the door behind us, and suddenly the spacious room felt intimate. "Sit," she said, but her voice was softer than her commanding tone suggested. I perched on the edge of the leather chair across from her desk, hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. She looked immaculate as always, not a hair out of place, her makeup perfect, her navy suit crisp. No one would ever guess that 12 hours ago, I'd had my hands tangled in that perfectly styled hair while she made me forget my own name. "People are talking," I said without preamble. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those penetrating gray eyes. "Let them talk. Bridget, be serious." If this gets back to our, what? That two consenting adults were working late during a storm? She arched one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I'm not seeing the scandal, but I could see it in her eyes. She was as affected by last night as I was, despite her calm demeanor. There was a tension in her shoulders, a careful control in the way. She held herself that told me she was fighting the same battle I was. You know, it's more than that, I said quietly. She stood, moved to the window, her back to me. The morning light streaming through the glass turned her hair almost black, highlighted the elegant line of her spine. I wanted to go to her to smooth away the tension I could see in her posture, but I forced myself to stay seated. I meant what I said last night, she said finally, about not letting you run again. And I meant what I said about you scaring me. I stood too, unable to sit still any longer. This is my career, Bridget, my life. I've worked too hard to let, she turned, cutting me off. To let what? Happiness? Love? A chance at something real? Her voice rose slightly, passion bleeding through her professional mask. You're so afraid of taking risks that you'd rather live half a life than fight for what you want. That's not fair, isn't it? She moved closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume again. 5 years ago, you walked away because it was easier than facing what we had together. The intensity, the way we consumed each other, it terrified you then, and it terrifies you now. She was right, and we both knew it. What Bridget and I had shared had been beyond passionate. It had been obsessive, all-consuming, the kind of love that burns so bright it threatens to incinerate everything. Around it, I'd been 25 and scared of losing myself completely in her orbit. Maybe I had good reason to be terrified, I shot back. Look what happened the first time we tried this. We couldn't be in the same room without fighting or fucking. It was toxic. Her smile was sharp. Was it, or was it just real? Raw. Everything that matters in this world is dangerous, Sienna. The question is whether you're brave enough to reach for it. Before I could respond, a sharp knock interrupted us. Bridget's assistant, efficient-looking woman in her 50s, poked her head in. Ms. Rivera. Mr. Morrison would like to see you in his office, both of you, she added, glancing at me. My stomach plummeted. Morrison never called joint meetings unless something was seriously wrong. The walk to the CEO's office felt like a death march. Morrison was waiting behind his massive desk, his expression unreadable. At 62, he'd built his reputation on being fair but ruthless when necessary. Sit, he said curtly. We took the chairs across from him, careful not to look at each other. My palms were sweating. I'm going to cut to the chase, Morrison began, folding his hands on the desk. There are rumors circulating about an inappropriate relationship between the two of you. I don't typically involve myself in office gossip, but when it concerns two of my senior staff members, it becomes my business. I opened my mouth to deny it, but he held up a hand. I don't want details. What I want is for this situation to be resolved quickly and professionally. The company has a strict policy about relationships between supervisors and subordinates, which this technically isn't, but the appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging. Bridget leaned forward. With all due respect, sir, our personal lives become my concern when they affect workplace dynamics. He cut her off. I've already had 3 people express concerns about favoritism, and you've been here less than 2 months. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure they could both hear it. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of, exactly why I'd tried so hard to keep my distance. What are you saying? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Morrison's expression softened slightly. I'm saying that one of you needs to transfer to our Chicago office, or one of you needs to find employment elsewhere. I'm sorry, but I can't have this disruption continue. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Chicago meant starting over, leaving everything I'd built here. But finding another job at my level wouldn't be easy, especially with whispers following me. How long do we have to decide? Bridget asked, her voice perfectly controlled. 2 weeks. And in the meantime, I expect you both to maintain absolute professionalism. No more late night meetings, no more closed door conferences unless there's a witness present. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Outside his office, Bridget grabbed my arm, steering me toward the stairwell where we couldn't be overheard. "This is insane," she said, her careful composure finally cracking. "We shared one kiss, and they're treating us like we committed corporate espionage." "It was more than one kiss," I pointed out weakly. "You know what I mean." She ran a hand through her hair, messing up her perfect style. "We can't let them win, Sienna. We can't let fear make our choices for us." But I was already retreating, already building walls. Maybe this is for the best. Maybe we're getting a second chance to do the right thing. Her eyes flashed dangerously. The right thing according to who? According to a corporate policy written by people who've never felt what we feel for each other. According to common sense, I snapped. Look what happened in less than 24 hours. We couldn't keep our hands off each other for one night. And now our careers are in jeopardy. So that's it? Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more hurt than if she'd shouted. "You're going to run again? Choose safety over love?" I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was being practical, not cowardly. But the words wouldn't come because deep down, I knew she was right. I was running from her, from the intensity of what we shared, from the risk of losing myself in her all over again. "I have to think about this," I said finally. Her smile was bitter. "No, you don't. You've already decided. I can see it in your eyes. You're already gone." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the stairwell with my heart in pieces and the taste of ashes in my mouth. The next 2 weeks were pure hell. True to Morrison's orders, we maintained scrupulous professionalism during business hours. But the tension was suffocating. Every meeting felt charged. Every accidental brush of fingers when passing documents sent electricity shooting through me. The entire office could feel it, the way we orbited each other like binary stars, pulled together by gravity we couldn't escape. I'd thrown myself into work, staying late every night, taking on extra projects. Anything to avoid going home to my empty apartment where I'd inevitably replay that night in the conference room. But even buried in spreadsheets and client proposals, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The worst part was watching her suffer too. Despite her confident facade, I could see the shadows under her eyes, the way her smiles never quite reached them anymore. During meetings, I'd catch her staring out the window with an expression of such profound loneliness that it took everything I had not to go to her. Jessica had tried to get me to talk about it, but how could I explain that I was in love with someone who represented everything dangerous and unpredictable about my own heart? How could I tell her that I was terrified of wanting something so badly that it might destroy me? On Friday of the first week, Bridget appeared at my cubicle just as I was packing up for the day. "Have dinner with me," she said quietly. I glanced around, but most people had already left for the weekend. "Bridget, we can't, not a date. Just two adults having a conversation about our impossible situation." Her voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes were pleading. "Please, Sienna, we need to figure this out." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The restaurant she chose was small and intimate, tucked away in a part of town where we weren't likely to run into colleagues. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger, more like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "You look tired," she said as we were seated at a corner table. "So do you." We ordered wine, too much wine, and for the first hour, We talked around everything that mattered. Work, the weather, anything but the elephant in the room. It wasn't until we were halfway through our entrees that she finally broached the subject we were both thinking about. "I've been offered a position in New York," she said, twirling her fork in her pasta. "Head of strategic development at Preston. And associates, it's a good opportunity." My stomach dropped. "You're leaving? That depends on you." I set down my wine glass, my hand trembling slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "It means I'm tired of the stance we've been doing for 5 years. Tired of pretending I don't love you, that I don't dream about you every night, that seeing you with other people doesn't make me want to burn the world down. Bridget, let me finish." Her voice was soft but steady. "I know you're scared. I know this feels too big, too dangerous. But I also know that what we have together is real. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it hurts, but it's real in a way that most people never get to experience." She reached across the table, her fingers covering mine. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your career. I'm asking you to choose us over fear." I stared at her joined hands, feeling the familiar electricity that sparked whenever she touched me. "And if I can't? If I'm not brave enough?" Her smile was sad but understanding. "Then I'll take the job in New York, and we'll both spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been." The waiter came to clear our plates, breaking the spell. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her ultimatum settling between us. "I need time," I said finally. She nodded, signaling for the check. "You have until Monday." That's when I need to give Preston my answer. Outside the restaurant, she kissed my cheek, a soft, lingering touch that felt like goodbye. "For what it's worth," she whispered against my ear, "I think you're braver than you know. You just have to decide if what we could have together is worth the risk." I watched her drive away, my hand pressed to my cheek where her lips had been, and I knew I was at a crossroads. I could choose safety, let her go, transfer to Chicago, rebuild my carefully ordered life, or I could choose love, messy, dangerous, life-altering love that might destroy everything I'd worked for. That weekend, I barely left my apartment. I paced, I cried, I made lists of pros and cons that didn't help because they couldn't quantify. The way my heart raced when she looked at me, or the way the world seemed brighter when she smiled. On Sunday night, my sister called. "You sound terrible," Amy said after 5 minutes of stilted conversation. "What's wrong?" I found myself spilling everything: Bridget's return, the night in the conference room, Morrison's ultimatum, the job offer in New York. Amy listened without judgment, the way only a sister could. "Do you love her?" she asked when I finished. "Yes," I whispered. "God help me, yes." "Then what are you waiting for? It's not that simple." "There are consequences, complications. There always are." Amy cut me off. "Do you remember what you told me when I was afraid to move to Seattle with David? You said that love doesn't come with guarantees, but a life without risk isn't really living." Her words echoed in my head long after we hung up. A life without risk isn't really living. I thought about the last 5 years, the careful choices, the safe relationships that never quite satisfied, the feeling that I was watching my life from the outside rather than living it. I thought about Bridget's laugh, the way she challenged me to be better, stronger, more than I thought I could be. I thought about the electricity that sparked between us, the way she made me feel completely alive. And I thought about spending the rest of my life wondering, what if? By Monday morning, I knew what I had to do. I was waiting outside Morrison's office when he arrived at 7:30 a.m. "Sienna?" He looked surprised to see me there so early. "Is everything all right?" "I need to speak with you," I said, following him into his office. He poured himself coffee from the machine in the corner, offering me a cup that I declined with shaking hands. "What can I do for you?" he asked, settling behind his desk. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I was about to do. "I'm resigning." His eyebrows shot up. "That seems like a rather drastic response to the situation." "Not because of your ultimatum," I clarified. "Because I've realized I don't want to work for a company that prioritizes appearance over substance. That would rather lose valuable employees than deal with the possibility of office gossip." Morrison's expression hardened. "That's not what this is about, and you know it. We have policies that don't actually apply to our situation," I interrupted, finding my courage. "Bridget isn't my supervisor, and I'm not hers." "Where?" "Both senior staff, both adults, both perfectly capable of maintaining professionalism despite personal feelings. The only reason this became an issue is because people like to talk, and you decided it was easier to make us the problem than address the real issue, a corporate culture that treats grown adults like children who can't be trusted to manage their own personal lives." I stood, pulling an envelope from my briefcase. My formal resignation. 2 weeks' notice, as per my contract. He stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "Sienna, let's not be hasty. You're a valuable member of this team, valuable enough to trust with million-dollar accounts, but not valuable enough to trust with my own heart." I placed the envelope on his desk. "I'm sorry it's come to this, but I won't be forced to choose between love and livelihood by small-minded thinking." Walking out of his office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Terrified, but light. I had no idea what came next, no job lined up. No safety net except my savings and a love that might or might not be enough to build a future on. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was truly alive. Bridget was at her desk when I knocked on her door frame, looking up with tired eyes that brightened when she saw me. "Good morning," she said carefully. "I quit," I announced, stepping into her office and closing the door behind me. She blinked. "You what?" "I quit. Effective in 2 weeks." Told Morrison exactly what I thought of his policies and his corporate culture. A slow smile spread across her face, transforming her from tired to radiant in seconds. "And the job in New York?" "I was hoping you might turn it down," I said, moving to stand in front of her desk. "See, I have this crazy idea about starting our own agency, about building something together that's ours, where we make the rules." She stood, coming around the desk to face me. "That's insane. We'd be starting from scratch, no clients, no reputation, no limits," I finished. "No corporate policies, no worried glances, no having to hide what we feel for each other." She searched my eyes, looking for doubt, for the fear that had driven me away before. "Are you sure? Really sure?" "Because I meant what I said. I can't do this halfway anymore. If we do this, it's all in. Business partners, life partners, everything." I reached for her hands, lacing our fingers together. "I'm terrified," I admitted, absolutely terrified. "But I'm more afraid of spending my life wondering what might have been." She kissed me then, right there in her office with the door closed, and the blinds open, and I didn't care who might see. It was soft and sweet and full of promises, tasting like hope and new beginnings. "So what do we call this agency of ours?" She asked against my lips. "Henderson and Rivera," I said without hesitation. "Equal partners in everything." Her smile was brilliant. I love the sound of that. 6 months later, I stood in the empty office space we just signed a lease for, watching Bridget direct the movers with the same commanding presence she'd once used in Morrison's boardroom. Except now, that commanding presence was working for us. "The conference table goes in the main room," she called out, then turned to me with a grin. "Our conference table? No more stolen moments. We can have all the meetings we want." I laughed, remembering that storm-soaked night that had changed everything. Scandalous meetings. The most scandalous, she agreed, wrapping her arms around my waist. Think we can christen it properly later? Bridget Rivera, you were incorrigible. And you love me for it. She was right. I did love her for it, for her boldness, her refusal to settle for less than everything she wanted, her ability to make me braver than I'd ever thought possible. The last 6 months had been a whirlwind. Leaving Morrison and Associates had caused exactly the scandal we'd expected and exactly the response we hoped for. 3 of our biggest clients had followed us, tired of the firm's old-school mentality and attracted to our promise of innovative, personalized service. Henderson and Rivera Strategic Consulting had started in Bridget's apartment with 2 laptops. And a dream. Now we had an office, 3 employees, and a client roster that was growing every week. You know what the best part is? I said, watching our new sign being installed on the glass door. What's that? No more hiding. No more pretending. We're just colleagues when you make me feel like I could conquer the world. She spun me around right there in our empty office, and I laughed, actually laughed, with pure joy. When had I become this person? This woman who danced in empty offices and took leaps of faith and chose love over security? What I'd chosen? Her, when I'd finally stopped running. I have something for you, she said, reaching into her briefcase. It was a small velvet box, and my heart stopped. Bridget ... It's not what you think, she said quickly, though her cheeks were flushed. Well, it is, but not yet. Not until we're really established, until you're sure this is what you want. She opened the box to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant to interlocking circles, simple and elegant. A promise, she said softly, lifting it from the box. That we're in this together, business, life, everything. I turned so she could fasten it around my neck, feeling the cool metal settle against my skin. When I faced her again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you, I said, the words coming easier now than they ever had. I love you, and I love what we've built together, and I love who I am when I'm with you, even when I drive you crazy. Especially then. She kissed me, soft and sweet, in the middle of our empty office with the afternoon sun streaming through. The windows. It tasted like victory, like home, like the beginning of something beautiful. 2 years later, Henderson and Rivera had become one of the most sought-after boutique consulting firms in the city. We'd been featured in 3 industry magazines, had a waiting list of potential clients, and had expanded to a team of 12. But the real victory wasn't professional, it was personal. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Bridget burst into my office, practically vibrating with excitement. We got it, she announced, waving a contract, the Meridian account. All of it. I shot up from my chair. Meridian was the white whale of consulting clients, a multinational corporation that had never worked with a firm smaller than the Big Four. Landing them would cement our reputation permanently. How? I asked, scanning the contract she thrust at me. They said they were tired of being just another number at the big firms. They want innovative thinking, personal attention, and her grin was wicked. They specifically mentioned our reputation for unconventional solutions. I grabbed her hands, pulling her around my desk. Do you realize what this means? That we're officially too big to fail, that we did it. Everything we dreamed of that day in the empty office, we actually did it. She cupped my face in her hands, her thumbs tracing my cheekbones. We did it together. That's the part that matters. Before I could respond, she was kissing me, and I was kissing her back with all the passion and joy and fierce pride I felt. This was ours, what we'd built, what we'd fought for, what we'd chosen despite every reasonable argument against. When we broke apart, I realized our office door was open and half our staff was watching from the main workspace, grinning like fools. Sorry, called out Marcus, our lead analyst. But you two are kind of adorable when you're being disgustingly successful together. I blushed, but Bridget just laughed. Get used to it. We're celebrating tonight drinks for everyone. The cheer that went up from our team made my heart swell. This was what we'd built, not just a business, but a family. People who believed in what we were doing, who supported not just our professional vision, but our personal one too. That night, as our team celebrated at the trendy bar down the street, I found myself on the rooftop terrace, looking out over the city lights. Bridget appeared beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. Penny, for your thoughts? Just thinking about how different my life is now, I said, accepting the glass. 2 years ago, I was so afraid of taking risks that I almost let the best thing in my life slip away again. But you didn't, she pointed out. When it mattered, you chose to be brave. We both did. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping champagne and watching the city sparkle below us. From here, we could see the building where Morrison and Associates was housed, where we'd met again, where we'd fallen apart and come back together, where we'd made the choice that changed everything. Do you ever regret it? I asked quietly. Giving up the safety of working for someone else. Bridget set down her glass and turned to face me fully. Sienna, look at me. I met her eyes, those storm gray eyes that had been my undoing and my salvation. I have never, she said, her voice fierce with conviction, not once, regretted choosing you, choosing us. This life we've built together is everything I ever dreamed of and more. Even when we fight about quarterly projections, especially then, she laughed. Do you know why? I shook my head. Because even when we disagree, even when you're being impossibly stubborn about budget allocations, I get to go home with you every night. I get to wake up next to you every morning. I get to build something meaningful with the woman I love. She pulled the small velvet box from her pocket, a different box than the one from 2 years ago, but similar enough to make my breath catch. Bridget ... We're established now, she said, dropping to one knee right there on the rooftop terrace. Our company is thriving. We've proven we can be partners in every sense of the word, and I am absolutely, completely sure that this is what I want. She opened the box to reveal a stunning solitaire diamond, simple and elegant and perfect. Sienna, Henderson, will you marry me? Will you be my business partner, life partner, and wife? Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives? Through the tears that were streaming down my face, I could see our team watching from inside the bar, Jessica with her hands pressed to her mouth, Marcus giving an encouraging thumbs up, everyone waiting for my answer. Yes, I whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. She slipped the ring onto my finger with shaking hands, then stood to kiss me as cheers erupted from inside the bar. The ring caught the light from the city below, sending sparkles across the terrace like stars. I love you, she said against my lips. I love you too. So much. It terrifies me and thrills me and makes me feel like I could do anything. You can do anything, she said firmly. We can do anything. Together. That was 3 years ago. Now, as I sit in our home office, the same space where we started Henderson and Rivera, I can hear Bridget on a conference call in the next room, her voice confident and commanding as she pitches a new client. Henderson and Rivera is now one of the most successful boutique firms in the country. We have offices in 3 cities, a team of 40, and a client list that reads like a who's who of Fortune 500 companies. But more importantly, we have each other. Marriage hasn't made things easier. If anything, it's made them more complicated. We're partners in business and in life, which means there's nowhere to hide when we disagree, no escape from the intensity that still burns between us. We fight about strategy, about hiring decisions, about whose turn it is to take out the trash. But we also laugh together every day, support each other through challenges, and still look at each other across crowded conference rooms like we share the most delicious secret. The passion that once terrified me now grounds me. The intensity that I thought would consume us instead fuels everything we do. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago. We've grown together, challenged each other, become the best versions of ourselves. I touched the pendant at my throat, those two interlocking circles that Bridget gave me in our empty office. Next to it hangs a new addition, my wedding ring on a chain, because I gestured too much during presentations and learned the hard way that diamonds and whiteboards don't mix. Sienna? Bridget's voice calls from the other room. Are you ready for the Morrison meeting? I smile, closing my laptop. Yes, Morrison as in Morrison and Associates. 6 months ago, they approached us about a merger. The company that once forced us to choose between love and career now wants to benefit from what we've built together. We're not interested in merging, but we've agreed to a partnership that will benefit both firms. It feels like cosmic justice being courted by the same people who once saw our relationship as a liability. Coming, I call back, but I take a moment to look around this room where so much of our story has unfolded. On the wall hangs our first magazine feature, the one that called US, the dynamic duo of strategic consulting. Next to it is a photo from our wedding day, both of us laughing as we cut the cake. And beside that, the business license that started it all, Henderson and Rivera Strategic Consulting, founded by two women brave enough to bet everything on love. I find Bridget in the main office, straightening her blazer in front of the mirror. She catches my eye in the reflection and smiles. Ready to show Morrison what he missed out on? More than ready. She turns and I'm struck again by how beautiful she is, not just physically, though she's still the most gorgeous woman I've ever seen, but the confidence she radiates, the way she moves through the world like she owns it, the way she looks at me like I'm the most precious thing in her universe. What? She asks, noticing my stare. Just thinking about how lucky I am. We both are, she corrects, reaching for my hand. Our rings catch the light matching platinum bands that we designed together, engraved with the date we first met and the coordinates of that conference room where everything changed. As we head out to meet with Morrison, I think about that night in the storm when she told me that everything that matters in this world is dangerous. She was right. Love is dangerous. Following your dreams is dangerous. Building a life with someone who challenges you to be more than you ever thought possible is the most dangerous thing of all, but it's also the most rewarding. We built Henderson and Rivera from nothing but ambition and love. We've weathered professional challenges, personal struggles, and the occasional disagreement about office furniture. We've celebrated victories and learned from failures. We've grown from two people afraid of their own feelings into partners who face the world as a united front. And through it all, the electricity between us has never dimmed. If anything, it's gotten stronger, more refined, more purposeful, channeled into building something that will last. As we walk into the Morrison and Associates building where our story began, I squeeze Bridget's hand. No matter what happens in there, I whisper, we've already won. She squeezes back, her smile brilliant. Damn right we have. The elevator, doors close, and I catch our reflection in the polished steel. Two successful businesswomen, partners in every sense of the word, ready to take on whatever challenges come next. 5 years ago, I was a woman so afraid of risk that I almost let love slip away. Today, I'm someone who takes calculated risks every day, who built a business empire with a woman she loves, who knows that the most dangerous choice is often the right one. The elevator climbs toward our future, and I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, Bridget and Sienna. Henderson and Rivera, two hearts that beat as one, two souls that found their perfect match in each other. The doors open and we step out into our next adventure, hand in hand, ready for anything. After all, we've already proven that love can conquer corporate policy, that passion can fuel success, and that sometimes the most reckless thing you can do is exactly what your heart needs. We chose love over fear, and it made all the difference.